That city is a living organism whose mind is the truth of God and whose will is his love and his liberty. God created Adam as pure contemplative. Material creation was subject to Adam's reason, and the soul of Adam was perfectly subjected to God. United to God in a very high degree of vision and love, Adam would have transmitted to all mankind his own perfection, his own liberty, his own peace in the vision of God. In Adam, all men were to be, as it were, one contemplative, perfectly united to one another in their one vision and love of the one truth. Original sin, an act of spiritual apostasy from the contemplative vision and love of God, severed the union with God that depended on the subjection of Adam's will to the will of God. Since God is truth, Adam's apostasy from him was a fall into falsehood, unreality. Since God is unity, Adam's fall was a collapse into the division and disharmony. All mankind fell from God in Adam, and just as Adam's soul was divided against itself by sin, so all men were divided against one another by selfishness. The envy of Cain, which would have been impossible in Eden, bred murder in a world where each self-centered individual had become his own little god, his own judge and standard of good and evil, falsity and truth. St. Augustine traces the history of this divided city of conflict and hate through all history from the fall of Adam to the end of time and even into eternity. But at the same time, he contemplates and exposes to our gaze the history of that other city, planned by God to repair the work that Adam's sin could not be allowed to ruin. It was in the new Adam, Christ, that man was to be raised again to the friendship and vision of God. Not indeed the contemplation Adam had enjoyed in Eden, still less the clear vision of beatitude. But heaven was to begin on earth in faith and charity. God would be seen, but only in darkness, and man would be united in one body, but only at the cost of struggle and self-sacrifice. The whole of history, since the ascension of Jesus into heaven, is concerned with one work only, the building and perfecting of this city of God. Even the wars, persecutions, and all other evils which have made the history of empires terrible to read and more terrible to live through have had only this one purpose. They have been the flails with which God has separated the wheat from the chaff, the elect from the damned. They would have been the tools that have fashioned the living stones, which God would set in the walls of his city of vision. The difference between the two cities is the difference between the two loves. Those who are united in the city of God are united by the love of God and of one another in God. Those who belong to the other city are indeed not united in any real sense, but it can be said that they have one thing in common besides their opposition to God. Each one of them is intent on the love of himself above all else. In St. Augustine's classical expression, these two cities were made by two loves, the earthly city by the love of self unto the contempt of God, and the heavenly city by the love of God unto the contempt of self. The earthly city glories in its own power, the heavenly in the power of God. But there is a deeper psychological explanation of these two loves and of the way they contribute to the formation of two distinct societies. The love which unites the citizens of the heavenly city is disinterested love, or charity. The other city is built on selfish love, or cupidity. Now, there are two reasons why only one of these loves, charity, can serve as the foundation for a happy and peaceful commonwealth. The first reason is metaphysical. Charity is a love that leads the will to the possession of true values because it sees all things in their right order. It sees creatures for what they are, means to the possession of God. It uses them only as means, and thus arrives successfully at the end, which is God. But cupidity is doomed from the start to frustration because it is based on a false system of values. It takes created things for ends in themselves, which they are not. The will that seeks rest in creatures for their own sake stops on the way to its true end, terminates in a value which does not exist, and thus frustrates all its deepest capacities for happiness and love. The second reason is psychological and moral. Those who love God love a supreme and infinite good that cannot be diminished by being shared. Those who place their hopes on the possession of created and limited goods are doomed to conflict with one another and to everlasting fear of losing whatever they may have gained. Hence, the city that is united in charity will be the only one to possess true peace, because it is the only one that conforms to the true order of things, the order established by God. The city that is united merely by an alliance of temporal interests cannot promise itself more than a temporary cessation from hostilities, and its order will never be anything but a makeshift. St. Augustine has left us a famous illustration of the way the citizens of the heavenly city are united in their knowledge and love of God. At the beginning of his De Doctrina Christiana, he calls to mind the audience in a Roman theater. He shows us the spectators coming together, strangers from different places, to sit and watch the play. Soon, one of the actors begins to arouse the admiration of individuals. They like him and they begin to applaud. Then, finding their own enthusiasm reproduced in others, they begin to love one another for the sake of him that they love. A bond is established. They begin to encourage one another in applauding their favorite. Anyone who has been to the opera in a large Italian city will appreciate St. Augustine's description. The enthusiasm spreads through the crowd, and a society is spontaneously generated by this common bond of love for a common object of contemplation. At the same time, those who do not share this admiration and love are, by the very fact, excluded and divided off into another, contrary society. So it is with the two cities of heaven and earth. Their two loves divide them beyond reconciliation. They are traveling in opposite directions, and thus it is impossible that their roads should ever reach the same term. Nevertheless, the fact that the two cities are opposed to one another does not mean that they cannot peacefully coexist here on earth. It is not impossible that they should agree upon a modus vivendi. They can come to terms, and it is well that they should do so. The temporal advantage of worldly society is well served when the citizens of heaven still living in the world are protected by the temporal power. And although the Church as a whole can only profit by persecution, nevertheless, temporal peace is a greater blessing. and one to be prayed and worked for, since it provides the normal condition under which most men can safely expect to work out their eternal destiny. Was St. Augustine planning a temporal theocracy, a holy Roman Empire in the city of God? It is abundantly clear that the city he described is the kingdom of Christ, which, as Jesus told Pilate, is not of this world. Nevertheless, that does not mean that Augustine would necessarily have frowned upon a temporal theocracy. But it certainly entitles us to suppose that he would not have placed very high hopes in one. The real value of this book, then, is not to be found in the help it may offer in solving immediate problems of policy in the world. What it offers us is something far more important. It opens our eyes to the deep and vital view of history, which is the Christian and mystical view, the vision of St. Paul and of the evangelists who knew that Christ had come into the world to draw all things to himself, and who saw that all things worked together for the good of them that love God. Because all the good and evil of history, all the prosperity and adversity which come upon the saints in this life, serve only to forward the growth of the mystical Christ unto a perfect man and unto the measure of the age of the fullness of Christ. This eschatological view of history contemplates with joy the running out of the sands of time and looks forward with gladness to the last day that will make manifest the full and final glory of the whole Christ. The city of God, for those who can understand it, contains the secret of death and life, war and peace, hell and heaven. Abbey of Gethsemane, January 4th, 1950.